If you'll join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, I know it's a little disoriented, but let's get it together. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Item 1, if we could have the roll call, please.
Yes. Okay. Okay, Director Ratterman?
Here.
Director Cicada? Here. Director Thomas?
Here.
Director Davidson?
Here.
And President Underhill?
Okay. Item number 2, excuse me. Item number 2 is public comment. Someone's got something on. We're hearing a little noise. At this time, members of the public may address the board on any non-agendized item. The public is encouraged to work through staff to place items on the agenda for board consideration. No action can be taken on matters not listed on the agenda. Comments are limited to 3 minutes per person. Do I have any public comment this morning or this afternoon? Okay. Well, hearing none, we will proceed to item 3, the consent agenda. 3A, approval of minutes for the board meeting of May 27th. 3B, review of timesheets. 3C, ratifying the claims summary. 3D, report on the write-off of uncollectible accounts receivable. And 3E, report on the monthly investment transactions.
Move for acceptance of the consent agenda.
Ask for a second.
I seconded it and just made a motion.
Okay. Moved and seconded. Call the roll, please.
Okay. Director Ratterman?
Yes.
Director Cicada? Yes. Director Thomas?
Yes.
Director Davidson? Director Davidson?
Yes.
Okay, President Underhill?
Yes. Okay, we'll go into item number 4, which is new business. 4A, discussion direction regarding the district's termination of service policy. And this one goes to Joel Metzger, External Affairs Manager. Joel.
Yes. I'm just going to throw my presentation if you have it in your inbox too, if you want to. But if not, I just want to be able to refer to it here. what I get going, and then we're able to bring that up if we can. Good afternoon, members of the board. I'm here to revisit the termination of service policy for a discussion item. We wanted to make sure that the board was aware of some discussions we've had at the staff level on some fees related to the termination of service policy. So make sure that everyone has the history on how we got to implementing the termination of service policy. And I think the important thing to remember is that back in the 1990s and the 2000s, there was a suspension of service policy which allowed someone to call a district and say, I would like to just have you turn off my service for a while because I'm not going to be at my second home. So just go ahead and suspend it, and then when I come up for the weekend, I might call you again and have you come and turn it on, and then I'll use your service for the weekend, and then when I leave, I want you to turn it back off again. This policy became abused. There were many people who were turning on, turning off. The district wasn't able to collect consistent revenues, and it was costing the district a lot of money because we weren't charging for these things. So that policy was changed, and the suspension of service policy became much more narrowly defined to where it could not be abused in that manner. Termination of service was allowed for a time as well. However, the board decided to no longer allow termination of service policy to allow in 2011. And so we had no termination of service for any reason from 2011 through 2019. That policy led certain customers to complain to board members and members of the customer service department about the inability to terminate in certain situations. And the most common thing that we heard was if someone had an empty lot and for some reason they had purchased capacity fees for water or wastewater, but they didn't decide to build a house. And so they were paying bi-monthly base rates for services that they weren't directly using, although we do have the ability per court case law to charge people even if they aren't using that service. And so we did charge these bi-monthly base rates for water and sewer customers who had empty lots over that period. However, eventually the board asked staff to take another look at it. And so in August of 2019, just last year, the board worked through the finance committee, and then the full board adopted a new termination of service policy. And this did very narrowly, only for certain individuals, allow termination of service to occur. And so I wanted to go through some of the criteria of what that policy allowed. So I think that on slide 6, what the termination of service policy that's currently in place allows is if the lot is vacant with no habitable structures, there's no water use in the past 2 years. If someone does want to terminate, they have to terminate both water and wastewater services on the lot. The termination must be approved.
Has joined the meeting.
There's a $300 administrative fee to cover the cost of processing the application and reviewing it to make sure that it qualifies and working with the applicant. The owner who applies must acknowledge that they will not get any capacity fees refunded if the termination is approved, but that a credit would be placed on the property for the amount of capacity fees that were initially paid when it was first brought into the system.
I'm sorry, is there any way we can get a printout for this meeting for a discussion of that right there? Is that the full criteria or is there more to it?
This is the summary of the criteria.
Is that possible? Somebody can print that and everybody else use it?
I'm sure we could have this.
I'd like to have it for discussion.
Sure, absolutely. And the notice of termination of service would be recorded with the clerk recorder's office that this termination had occurred. That way, even if the property sells, there's no question that the termination had occurred on this property. And if the termination is approved, the property owner cannot reapply to reinstate the service for 3 years. But if the property is sold, then that person, the new owner, could immediately apply to reinstate service on that land. But CCWD reserves the right to deny that new application if we don't have capacity in place for it. So the district is very protected with reinstatement. And then the next slide goes over the qualifications for reinstatement. Again, they have to pay an admin fee. To come back into the system, if approved, they would have to pay the difference between the original capacity fees paid, which could have been, 20 years ago, 10 years ago, and then the current capacity fees due at the time of reinstatement. So there's usually a difference between what was originally paid and what they'd have to pay to come back in. And we would record the reinstatement, all fees would have to be paid, and then that person could come back in. Now, I do want to highlight what the potential financial implications of this is. We've gone over this before, but there are 145 empty lots in the district, so if all of them terminated, we'd be looking at $152,000 of base rates that we would lose, just so we can, if everyone decided to do that, that's what we'd be looking at. Annually. Now,
Just quick clarification. There are 150 lots with water meters on them. There's thousands of lots just in general, right?
Right, that's correct. We do have many laterals that are part of our system that no one has ever paid a capacity fee for water, and so they are just kind of sitting out there waiting for someone to connect to them. Yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that there were more than that many lots. Go ahead. Sorry.
So why are we today? We're really zeroing in on a discussion around the operations fee, and so I just wanted to put the actual language up there. So our policy says, in order for the termination of services to be approved, the customer must pay a $300 administrative fee and an operations fee. This fee varies by connection to have the water meter removed and or the wastewater connection capped. And so this policy language is pretty wide open, and it gives staff a great deal of flexibility in how we charge this fee. And our interpretation as a staff is that we're going to cap this at the actual main line, not at the water meter or at the clean out. Yes.
Have we ever removed the lateral and capped it at this point in time?
We haven't gotten to the point where we have collected money and either removed a lateral, or actually what's more likely to happen based on this interpretation is that we actually would pothole down right at the main, and we would just cut it off and abandon that lateral in place, and then we would just cap it at the main itself. We'd probably leave that lateral.
So has any of our customers ever terminated wastewater service and we capped the lateral?
Well, none of these applications have gone all the way to that point yet, so no, not under this policy.
Is it a good time to talk about why you would choose to cap it at the main instead of where the meter comes off?
Yeah, absolutely, and I want to go through our discussions at the staff level, and then we can take some questions from the board. I think we have Damon here as well. So just looking at the cost, Damon actually has provided kind of a general cost estimate for what it would cost to cap this at the main line. So for water termination, we could be looking at $2,300 and change to cap it at the main, and for wastewater termination, we'd be looking at around $5,180. But again, that's just an estimate that we're putting together. Each one, could be a little bit different because the circumstances of each connection could be a little bit different. So why do we want to terminate the service at the main? It really comes down to a couple of reasons. We have liability if we have these service laterals that are still hooked up to our system and charged, active with water and wastewater, that lateral is still connected to our system. If we can eliminate those, then it eliminates our liability completely. And so some examples of what that liability is, when you have a service lateral that's still connected to our system, if it leaks, if the pipe gets old or if it's, rubs against a rock and develops a leak, then Damon's crew is still responsible to go out there and drill down and find that leak and repair it and put a wraparound on or whatever we need to do. And so, the fewer of these service laterals that we have connected to our system that are really going to nowhere, no one's paying for, you know, the best. We don't really want those out there.
Here, so, the district is responsible for the line, the lateral that goes from the main to the meter.
Correct.
Generally, how long is that? And my question is, why is the meter not right, or like a foot at the main? And so why do you have that long lateral going? Is it easier for the customer to connect, which, yeah, so.
So there are a lot of variables associated with both the potable side and the wastewater side, the sewer connection. We don't have uniform connection sites historically throughout all the service connections in the district. We may have one in our standards and specifications now, but generally you'll have long side service, meaning from one side of the main to the opposite side of the street to the lot, and then you'll have a short side service. So they can vary dramatically from 20, 30, 40 feet long to 5 feet, 3 feet. It's really kind of depends on the situation and the service area. We see all manner of water service lateral connections. And so we can have the classic service lateral connection where it's stubbed off the main right at the edge of the property line and the fog line, there's a nice meter box. Generally, we don't encounter that. So one of the main concerns operationally is that you're going to have, speaking of water, you're going to have a water service lateral that's going onto a lot that may span 5 to 10 feet of this property that now is not a part of CCWD's potable water system. And so we have 10 feet of service lateral that we are exposed, and we are responsible for its repair if should it fail. And so the thought from a risk perspective is because field folks are risk averse, right? And we want to make sure that everything's, for lack of a better term, buttoned up and clean and clear, that we don't have an exposure there at 2 o'clock in the morning. We have to go find a service lateral that is now under a tough shed because nobody owns it. And it is off our books and it's off the property owner's books. It's been abandoned and now we have to find it, try to move the shed, try to repair a or try to, jackhammer through a concrete slab to make a repair on a line. That's kind of the worst case. And then
We don't currently have an easement for that right now, so what would make that different if we left the pipe there? If there's an easement, which there should be, from what I just heard you say, worrying about somebody building something. How would that change?
So we often do have service laterals on property. I mean, it would be implied that we have an easement because we have appurtenances there and they are our customer. But if they're no longer our customer and that easement is no longer implied, the responsibility becomes cloudy as to who then has access to the property to make the repair, because technically the property owner is not our customer, and the infrastructure, while it may be ours, we might not necessarily have a right to be there. There's nuance associated with that also, and then on the sewer side, just to kind of touch upon why it's important to field staff to completely disconnect the sewer lateral, is that you can imagine a sewer lateral with a clean out or a Y, should that be broken, it's going to create not just a leak issue, but a regulatory issue and potentially an environmental issue that could turn into something much bigger than a simple leak repair. And so with the thought of, as we move towards terminating a service, if somebody truly wants to terminate a sewer service in order to really kind of reduce as much as possible the potential exposure to damages to the district, the most effective approach is to simply eliminate it. That said, I'm sure there's room here to kind of contemplate the options, but one of the other components that always goes back to in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, that this is no longer a part of the district's system, but we have appurtenances out there, something's going to fail. And it could be a property owner that means well, that's putting a trench in across the front of his property and hits a sewer lateral that technically shouldn't exist. And then, oh, what's this?
Your recommendation and the cost of $5,000, $2,300, whichever,
Right.
In that cost, are you saying taking out that whole line or just capping it from the lateral to the main, that small little space?
So for a sewer line, excuse me, we don't generally have isolation valves. So we would actually have to stop from manhole to manhole the flow temporarily, and we would actually cut out the lateral and install couplings and reestablish the main in the street. So there would be no Y that would be capped or no T that would be capped to the lot. It would just simply be a new stretch of sewer main without a
Why
line.
that? Why wouldn't you want to, where the current lateral goes in, cut it off, 12 inches, and put in a...
Dale Pilgrim.
You
Has
could do
joined the
that.
meeting.
We discussed that, but that just creates another failure point. So the thought was, yeah, we could do that, but now we have a capped 12 inches off the main connection. And if we're going to be in there, yeah, well, I mean, so there's a lot of, yeah, great point. But if we're going to deploy 5 folks, traffic control, isolated collection system, and bring in a backhoe and a back on, we might as well just cut the whole thing out and cut our losses and move on. But you do have a point. I mean, there's a number of ways to skin this cat. This is kind of worst case scenario. What I wanted to provide to you all is if the way I look at it, termination of services is we're truly, somebody has the intent of, hey, for whatever reason, I want to merge these 2 lots. So I'm never going to build this. So let's eliminate the infrastructure and give you what you need and reduce the potential negative impacts on us as much as possible. There are there's wiggle room.
Wiggle room, I'm saying, cut the lateral 12 inches off, cap it, and then also put in that record of filing or whatever, that now that customer is responsible for that lateral just laying there, because you charge to the water meter or whatever,
Right.
or the sewer. I just see that there's ways to work around it, and having a cost like this to a customer, I think it's just, to me, it's unacceptable, but that's here nor there. But I would like to see, try and do something that works for both the district and the customer. And when you come to one that says, man, we need to take it off for whatever reason, and it comes to the board, and you say, this is why we have to do it. Otherwise, try and do the cheapest, it makes great customer service. You're saying that the district owns that line right now, that's out there in La La Land with the meter, but no water use. Have you had any problems with it? If you did, you would have to do it anyway. So why is the customer going to be responsible for something that we already are responsible for? If anything, if we make it to where it's not in use anymore, that's one less thing we have to deal with if it's capped properly. And I think leaving the apparatus there, putting in a clean out for a sewer per se, and I don't know what the terminology is for water, it makes it more available for some years down the road when somebody says, I want to buy the house.
That's exactly what I was saying.
There,
Yeah.
but there's got to be a happier medium.
Right.
We're tearing it all out, and we might, have a problem with it.
You can have that 12 inches of stub that Cindy's talking about, and they did decide 3 years later. The other question I have is why 3 years, and what is that for? But if someone did decide, the new owner or that owner decided to change their mind and now needed service, it'd be a lot easier for us if that stub was there and we didn't take it completely out.
Yeah.
And we want more.
It might make sense to take it to the edge of the property line instead of 12 inches, then you're not working in the road.
Yeah, but then you don't know what
You're
you're
not
doing.
One of the things that I see that currently exists now is the property owner is paying the monthly rate associated with the service area as a whole, water or wastewater regardless, and the potential that I see that ends up happening is if they're terminating their service, they're no longer paying into our system. So then the customers that are still a part of our service area in our system are now paying the cost associated with the O&M for that lateral, whether it be a 12-inch capped sewer lateral or a 10-inch capped water service. So if we potentially have repaired it 5 times in between their termination of service and then a potential reconnection.
How likely is that? I mean, I know it could happen, and it does happen, but how likely, if it was a, one that wasn't in use, there's nothing flowing through it,
Right.
but it stubs off our line for 6 feet or 6 inches, what is the likelihood there's nothing in it? Shouldn't be anything in it, I'm trying to say about wastewater.
Yeah, so from wastewater, the wastewater perspective is really interesting. You're right, it's probably not gonna be routine. However, as we smoke test and as we investigate our system and look for areas of inflow and infiltration, we are continually surprised by what we find. And we find a heck of a lot of sewer laterals just now that are broken, that are a T off of another lateral on a lot where there's actually a home, but then there's a T and it's stubbed up and it's got a meter box around it and there's plants and it's an open pipe. And so we're always finding these odd things. And so and I don't want to make it appear that I'm trying to impress upon you this cost or this thought. It's just the concepts and the perception behind the objective is that for an operation, from an operations standpoint, as little exposure to leaks, repair, infiltration as possible is the preferred option for us.
I like the idea that the customer pays for it, period. I don't like the idea that we decided to make them do it the most expensive. I don't think there's a more expensive way to do this. I mean, if we might find more expensive to throw in it, but if we changed how they did it, it would cut these costs tremendously. Not more. And again, we're talking about the wastewater one, because it seems like it's the...
Yeah, well, the wastewater one is completely eliminating the district's risk to any future line break associated with that termination of service.
But also making it more difficult to hook it back up when and if that lot, use that lot changes, which happens. And look, the big question is, what is the 3 years about?
Well,
if someone wants to come back onto the system, right, and pay us a new connection fee, yeah, we're making them wait 3 years to do that.
So back to the direction that we got from the board when we wrote this policy, we wanted to make sure that this was not a really easy thing to do that would be abused. And so what we did is we built in some deterrents, one of which was you couldn't have just been using water, even if it's on an empty lot. A lot of people would hook up a faucet to their empty lot and they would water all the trees or something like that. So you couldn't have used any water, saying, I truly don't want to use this, I don't want this. Another deterrent that we built in was the sacrifice of capacity fees. So if 20 years ago you paid $2,000 to come into the system and buy a meter and get hooked up, and then now it's $20,000, you have to pay that difference to come back in, which is a big financial sacrifice. Whereas if you kept it, you're good. You have that value on that lot. So that was a deterrent that was built in. And then another deterrent is the 3 years that you're referring to. So we didn't want you to be able to just terminate and then just come right back in. We wanted to put a period of waiting where you would actually have to not come back in for a period of time. And these were all things to make it so it wasn't going to be abused and done easily.
What if you change the 3 years and maybe if they terminated it, we're telling them, I think, that they lost their connection fee.
They lose all but the original amount paid. So
what if they lost? How about if they just lose it all? And then if they wanted to come back on, they pay whatever connection fee we have on that day.
Per legal counsel's recommendation, it's a better position for the district to make sure that what was paid in originally stays with the property, and so we're on better legal footing if we keep that as a credit. So we chose to take that course of action.
But I can see why the 3 years would have, because if they paid $20,000 and they just got the connection 2 years ago, and now they terminated it, there'd be no connection fee if they wanted to just get it back at the end of the year.
It would be very mild, and you might have someone terminate for a matter of 8 months or something like that, and then come right back in. So we didn't want, that wasn't the purpose of this policy. The board's stated purpose was if there are these unique situations where someone feels stuck paying for something that they really don't want, and they just want to stop, then there was a pathway for them to do that. And so that's really what we heard when we got this policy together and put it forth.
I wonder if it would be possible to, I don't like to charge for them to do something online that we already are responsible for. But what if we said either pay this charge up front, or we'll use the credit you have potentially. And that credit would go here, and then now they don't have anything coming back in should they reconnect. Because we have you're saying they paid $6,000, so we'll give them credit when they go to reconnect. Well, instead of giving them credit, if they don't pay these fees, there is no more. So they're done, and they have to pay a new connection fee at whatever the price is, full price, whatever the connection fee is at that point.
I think our concern with that route is that legal counsel has advised us that we should make sure that the credit stays with the property, and that we should leave that with the property owner.
Well, I'd like to hear from legal and have them give us an opinion as to why that's important.
So this is Michael. Can I jump in here? Couple points. When we established that policy and we included costs and cost for termination and cost, when we talked a lot about how to assess the capacity fee if a customer wants to reinstate the service, and some of that, it wasn't that we were just trying to deter it. It was just, we were just trying to really capture the actual cost to the district that the district will incur at the customer's request, and that was where a lot of these policies, those parts of the policy came from. And then we talked about those different options with the capacity fee, and where we ended up was that the customer, because they've been paying the rate and the R&R portion, and they've been contributing to the cost and the upkeep of the system, they would get a credit for the capacity fee at the time they terminate the policy. But it's not a credit in the sense that they would be able to apply that anywhere else. It's just a credit that runs with that property for that capacity fee, so that if they reinstate service or a future owner reinstates service, they would only be responsible for the difference in the capacity fee if the capacity fee is increased. So that it's not a credit that could be applied to anything else, though. And that's one other important point to note, is that's if capacity is available. So that's the other risk that the customer would be taking. And in some of our systems, that's a real risk where we're up against capacity limitations, that the capacity may not be available to rejoin or reinstate service when they make that request.
Do you have specific numbers on where we haven't had capacity?
I don't know specific numbers. We do have, and we have had recently an instance in Forest Meadows where there was a moratorium on new connections. And I know that we still have capacity issues in Forest Meadows. We have capacity concerns on the wastewater side. In Arnold, in Copper, and La Contenta as well. We're not up against, we're not prohibiting new connections at this point, but that's a risk that the customer would have to take if they give up that capacity.
Okay.
This is Jeff. Hey, getting back to Cindy's comment about the capacity fees, you can't use capacity fees, but for anything except capacity. They can't be used for part of operations. So anything to do with the construction or decommissioning of those, I don't think you could use their capacity fees legally.
That's correct. That is correct. You can only use it for the upgrade or infrastructure. You can't use it for other purposes. That's the purpose of it.
But I have an opportunity.
Well, listen, let me put my 2 cents worth in here. I agree. It seems to me like we're creating as much work as we're going to save. If we're going to spend, $3,000 to decommission one of these things, and we're worried about having to spend a couple $1,000 down the road if it leaks, I don't really see how we're getting ahead here. I mean, I understand how you want to make it go back to new, but I also agree that a majority of these lot owners eventually will want that thing reconnected again. And so I know it'd be nice to put a whole new line in on their dime, but it just seems cost prohibitive, and we're going to have another policy that nobody will want to do because it costs too much.
So I would agree with you on that point. This is Jennifer. I'm a homeowner. My question is,
Excuse me, just 1 second. We're discussing amongst the board directors. We'll ask for public comment in just a few minutes, okay?
thank you.
Okay, other board?
Jeff, were you through?
Well, yeah, you know.
Okay, well, I would share my thoughts at this point too. I feel a little ill at ease about this because my signature is on the original policy thing that we adopted in August, and I certainly never imagined that it might cost $8,000 for somebody to terminate their service. That's not what I was visualizing when I signed that and the other board members approved it. I've heard what Damon said, the vulnerability and the risk as it's exposed to now with these laterals that may or may not fail and stuff, and that, I want to talk specifically about that. We identified that there's 145 or 142 empty lots that have a meter on them, but most of us know our districts better than the other districts. I can tell you, my knowledge about Copper Cove subdivision is that there are 2,000 lots there. As recently as 10 years ago or so, there was about 900 lots that were empty lots. But I think that each of those 900 lots, and maybe down to 800 now, have a lateral that comes off the main. So I could get behind what you guys are saying, that there's a huge risk for the district, but the only way I could force somebody to pay this on their own is if the district would take it upon themselves and remove those laterals from the 800 lots that do not have meters. Take those laterals out, and I think that everybody here would say that's a foolish idea. That is a crazy idea, and I don't think that in the report there's some mention about how much value there is to the property to have the water available, have the laterals available there. But has anybody thought about the dire consequences, the unintended consequences that we may be creating here by charging? Let's talk about water only, because that's what mostly is that we're talking about in Copper Cove subdivision. There's only around the lake that we have any sewer requirements. But if you charge somebody $2,000, $2,000 or $3,000 to remove that lateral, and then a future owner of that lot wants to build upon that lot, and he has to pay, who knows what it's going to be after 3 years. It might be $3,000 or $4,000 more for the crews to come back out. I would submit to you, and I know that I'm not wrong about this, that particular lot will be the last lot in Copper Cove subdivision that will sell, because it will not be competitively priced. Somebody's going to have to pay a premium for that lot. That in and of itself is reason enough for me to say we have to go back to the drawing board on this. We can't do that. And then the kind of the elephant that's in the room is that there's been three applications so far, and each of those applications have said, "Oh, wait a minute, I never anticipated this." What if we go ahead and we force them to do it? How much bad press, how much bad animosity is going to be generated against this district? I don't want that to happen. Nobody wants that to happen, but it's going to. If God, it's unconscionable that we would be considering this. So I don't know. As it's being proposed is not the policy that I was in favor of. I would, if this happens to get approved by the board, and I certainly understand how it could, I would be campaigning hard to have it revisited and thrown out. It's a bad deal, trust me.
I agree with Russ, everything he just said.
This is Michael. If I could jump in here again real quick. So one thing that I think is becoming, more and more clear as we work through this and the implementation of this policy, is there really are two different types of termination of service. And the policy doesn't right now allow for a lot of flexibility in treating those different circumstances uniquely. But the two different circumstances we come up against are a true permanent termination of service, where for various reasons that tend to be pretty unique circumstances, there is a second meter on a lot that is never going to be reconnected or used again, and truly will be permanently terminated, with no foreseeable reinstatement. The second is probably the much more common instance where we have property owners that have a meter, water and or wastewater, that they're not using, that's connected to a vacant lot. They want to terminate service so that they're not incurring the rate to maintain that service, but with the expectation that the property will be developed at some point again in the future. And so what staff can do at this point is, as Director Thomas suggested, go back to the drawing board with a policy that is more specifically geared towards that second category of termination of service, and come back to the board with a recommendation as to how we can accommodate essentially their temporary terminations of service, and in a way that accommodates the ratepayer and protects the district and the district's existing ratepayers.
Michael, I have a question, and this has to do with your number 2 explanation and the fact that the property will be developed at some point, but meanwhile, the monthly charges are still incurred, correct? There's no way that they can get out of paying monthly water or monthly sewer, depending on their service.
That's the circumstance I think we're addressing here.
Yeah. Okay. So that I know that that's why there's a lot of people listening in on, attending the meeting, specifically to voice their opinion about those charges that CCWD has. And again, if I remember correctly from last year, what we're doing is protecting our infrastructure, or, taking care of the costs of maintaining the infrastructure, correct?
Yeah, and so that's really what we're trying to do is make sure that we're protecting the district and our other ratepayers from incurring costs that are specific to those unique properties. And so that's what we're trying to protect the district against. But I think we could come up with, and we've had some discussions already about a different approach to these properties that we would anticipate developing again at some point in the future. And it may be something along the lines of not a full termination. The lateral is still there. The service is still available that could be reinstated to the property, very easily. But instead of, finding a way, hopefully they're not having to forfeit capacity, so they wouldn't run into that risk necessarily. But maybe they're still, because that property is still benefiting from the operation and maintenance of the system, and the service is still available. Maybe they're paying some portion of the rate, whether the O&M portion of the rate or something along those lines. And so it's a much lower cost, but still contributing something towards the cost of the operation and maintenance of a system that is really there to, making a service available to them, even if they're electing not to utilize it.
Right, right. Do we have any more directors' comments on this issue, on this item?
This is Cindy. You know, when I hear, it's not a very nice comment, I guess, but when I hear that you worry about other ratepayers paying additional costs because the other ratepayers are terminating, let's bring up why we allow credit card payments and the fees that the district absorbs. So I don't agree with that. And I think we need to revisit this and come up with, if there's a fee, it's a nominal fee, it's not $2,300. And we do what's right for the district. The district or the payers are the district. We're not separate. We're one entity working together and manage the public funds. And I think the cost of what we put here is not acceptable for me, and I think we should revisit that.
Okay, may I open it for public comment, please? Or Jeff, you want to?
Yeah, no, I just want to say that I agree with the policy, the basics of it. I just, where I think we need to revisit it is like a lot of Michael's comments about the flexibility. I, for one, think that we need to go the easiest reasonable route, which in my opinion is shutting these water meters off at the meter or right behind them or in the sewer lateral near the street. I just don't see that the risk. We're going to be doing work there anyway to take these all the way back in, and that includes the road patching that's become so difficult and all of that stuff. I just didn't know that we had available manpower to do all this stuff. So I'd like to see us take a look at where we're going to terminate these services and try to do it in a, maybe not a perfect way, but a more reasonable way for the customers also. That's it.
Okay. Any other? Cindy? Okay, then I can open it up for public comment.
Yes.
Hello, can I talk?
You're welcome.
Can I
Yes,
speak?
join us.
Okay. My name is Eric Glanville. I spoke to the board about this issue a few weeks ago. And like I mentioned then, I'm also a real estate broker in the area. And I've lived in Forest Meadows for 32 years. And I've sold hundreds, if not thousands of these lots several times over. And in looking
Lost you, Eric. Oh.
A participant has left the meeting.
This is Rob and Alice Montgomery. Rob's, if you don't mind, you will
Yeah,
contribute.
go ahead, Alice.
Yeah, hi. So this is Rob Montgomery, and we own a acreage in downtown Arnold that we have there's no buildings on it. We've never used water on it. There's maybe it's not important, but there is a sewer easement that goes right across the center of the lot, which reduces some of the possibilities of using the lot. We've owned it for over 7 years. We paid over $30,000 in CCWD fees. We had no intention of developing it.
Not now,
And
anyway.
yeah, and it's just, this is, I've gone back to the county and talked about the property taxes, and we've gotten some adjustment on that. But this water fee is, it's a burden for something that we get absolutely zero service for. I like the idea of a minimal cost to disconnect and not have to pay $8,000 to have laterals taken out. I also, think that being fair about setting up a structure that doesn't let someone to turn off for 6 months or 8 months is totally reasonable. But I urge the board to come up with something that doesn't burden landowners of unimproved land for forever with these costs. This cost is now approaching a double-digit percentage of what we paid for the property. And it's just a burden that, you know, frankly, I don't feel is fair.
And we're a fan of CCWD. It's not that.
We're also multiple, you know, we have multiple hookups to CCWD. So
Yeah.
we're paying our fair share.
We do appreciate CCWD very much.
Well, thank you for your comment. Could you say that again, please?
We do appreciate CCD very much. CCWD very much. We do.
Okay, Alice, at this point, you say you do not intend to develop the property and you just own it, period.
We don't have any plans. That's not to say never, ever, ever, but we have zero plans right now to develop it. And we're very cautious about, if we ever do, trying to do something good for the community. And it's just, you know, we're just not having plans right now to develop it in any foreseeable way. Not right now.
Okay. Okay. Do I have any other public, did Eric come back?
May I speak?
Oh, yes, go ahead.
Thank you. Sorry I interrupted earlier. My name's Jennifer. I'm here with Mary and Len Pumarda. We're homeowners. We own property there and total agreement with the Montgomerys, as well as I believe it was Jack that was speaking earlier, that this is an undue burden on us. We've contributed over $31,000 in fees over the last 20 years, for which we have never had any hookup, no water, no sewage, nothing, because we have an empty lot. So we understand that was what we got ourselves into. But we feel like we've paid more than our fair share at this point. Okay, so that's number one. Number two, we also appreciate this discussion, but we assume this was all worked out when we sent in our $300 application fee that was cashed shortly after in March. 3 months ago. So that's been 3 months, for which this is still being discussed back and forth. So we assume we were applying for something. Our check was cashed for a policy that was already determined. So we would like, number one, to have that returned to us while this is being worked out. And number two, in complete agreement with Jack and the Montgomerys, you know, I understand mitigating risk. That happens in all organizations. But to completely eliminate risk at this cost is a huge burden on us. We are now going to pay a fee of over $7,000. This lot is barely worth that much. So I would like you to consider that. We would be more than happy to have it capped, mitigate risk. I haven't heard, you know, what has been the past situations where costs have been incurred. And what type of risk are we looking at? Is this once every 10 years something happens? Is it 50 times a year? What type of risk are you worried about? Versus the cost that thousands, not well, hundreds, I would assume, of people might be paying $7,000. So we would like our application fee returned, and we would like consideration for this to be resolved at not a burden to people who've already paid literally $31,000 over the course of time. And we continue to pay over $150 a month. And it's just not feasible at this point. So thank you.
And may I assume that, Michael, you're listening to this customer's comment and
Absolutely. We're
Participant has joined the meeting.
Hello.
taking notes and we're
This is
already
Eric again.
anticipating.
When was I cut off?
Eric's back, but yes, President Underhill, we're hearing all of this. We're anticipating, bringing something back to the board based on direction from the board. And we understand people's frustration. We do have costs of maintaining and operating the system, whether people utilize the service that's available to them or not. And I know the board is well aware of that. But we also understand the frustration about this policy. This is a new policy, and sometimes with new policies and the implementation of it, some issues arise like this and require some revision. So we're listening to all of these comments, and we'll be prepared to bring back whatever it is the board is asking us to do.
Okay.
Sorry, I just want to.
Eric came back in.
I just want to ask for a quick clarification.
Oh.
What policy did we apply for? What
This
policy?
is under the termination of service policy that was just adopted in August of last year.
Can we have access to that?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's actually, I think it's in the agenda packet. It's absolutely a public document. We'll make sure you have a copy.
What were the costs incurred?
There is the $300 application fee and the operating costs that that's the issue is the cost of what the staff has interpreted as far as the operating cost of the termination of the service.
I guess the point is, if you apply for something and there's a fee involved, you need to know all the options. Incidentally, you're still considering the options today, whether you should be capping or fully removing services. So when we applied exactly 3 months ago and sent it our $300 fee, which was cashed immediately, no one told us it could be capping or it could be removing everything. So we didn't know what we're applying for, because you still haven't decided really what the policy is going to be. You're talking about that today. So you should have had, all of this discussion should have been done before you put an option out to the community that you may have an option of removing services. It might cost you $7,000 or it might cost you $400. We don't know. So we would never have applied if there was a possibility of spending another $7,000. We would not have submitted our application or our fee. So you take it.
I understand,
but you have your frustration. Information.
Yeah, I understand your frustration. That's why we brought this back to the board. We did have a very public process. We had this item, the development of this process of this policy took several months. It was back to the finance committee multiple times, and it came to the board. So the development of the policy was a very public process. And what we're facing now is the challenges in implementing the policy that were not anticipated when you paid your application fee. So that's why we've brought this back to the board. That's why we're having this public discussion, so that we can hear those frustrations and do what we need to do to address those concerns.
So will our application fee be returned?
That's something I think we'll have to consider as a part of this, all of this. I think what we've learned at this point from staff's perspective is if it's going as the way the policy was drafted and initially, implementation of the policy is taking much more work on our end, on the administrative end. But I think that's because of these issues that we're having right now. So my hope is we'll get this resolved, whether it's another tier of termination of service for temporary terminations of service, or whatever the policy solution is. We'll get it back to the board as soon as we can, and we will consider the application fees that were paid under the existing policy as a part of that.
Okay, that sounds reasonable. Again, I'm just not quite sure what the existing policy is, because when I spoke with Joel Metzger, he said you were entertaining the thought of capping or removing completely. So again, we were applying under the possibility it could be capped. And no one from your office, not the woman I spoke to there or Joel, gave us that complete information at the time of applying. So we send in the application, we send in the fee, and then after the fact, we're told it could be this much. A little late. All that should have been explained on an application itself. It should say fees may be this. And then you know whether to apply or not. This doesn't seem actually quite legal to do it this way. Take our money and then tell us later it could be this. None of that information came from your department, not from the woman at the office, not from Joe Metzger till I inquired. And he said he would send off my concerns to the general manager, who I never heard from. So no communications from your office in 3 months.
Yeah, we'd like an itemized receipt of what this fee, what service you provided to us, please, or send our check back.
I mean, just poor customer service.
Okay.
Information from
All
you
right.
all.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you for your comments, and we'll certainly, they will be addressed. And I want to bring
Bertha?
in Eric. Yes.
When was I cut off
No,
before?
no.
Do you have any idea?
Eric, you dropped
What
off.
was I referring to? Anybody remember?
Yeah, Eric, you had just finished talking about the 100 to 1,000 homes you turned over several times
Okay.
in Forest Meadows. And then boom, you were gone.
Gone. Okay. I'd just like to say that since I haven't been so involved with all these lots, I would like to mention that the gentleman who referred to taking up, the reason they were taking out the laterals, did you hear my comment on that?
Just make your
Comment
comment.
was,
You have your questions over again. Go ahead and start, Eric.
okay. He made a comment that when he was explaining why they want to take these laterals out back to the main, that somebody, disconnect and somebody may build something over the top of the lateral. Well, the water meters are put right at the property corners. So with the setbacks and everything else that are imposed, there's no way anybody could ever build over the top of that area that's going to have to be jackhammered through, like he explained. That's just totally ridiculous. So, like I said, or what trying to say, the existing policy as it is written, there's really nothing wrong with it, except the way, as everybody's mentioned, the way it's being implemented. The policy calls for removing the water meter, which is fine, and charging a fee for that, and capping the sewer. It doesn't say anything about tearing out the sewer lateral. Since these laterals are already capped, that should be a non-issue. There should be no charge for that. There should only be a charge, an application fee, and a fee of perhaps $250 for removing the water meter. I've seen them do it many times out here. It takes them about 15 minutes, take the meter out and put a little plug over the cap the stub out. So, and nothing's going to happen to that. And another thing, it's funny that if somebody here wants to build a new house right now on a lot, they're able to hook up to the existing sewer lateral, no problem. They don't have to tear out the old one and put in a new one. And if you want to move your connections from one lot to another, which you're allowed to do, when you vacate the old lot, you're not required to tear out the old sewer lateral. They just come out, they remove the meter, move it to the next lot, and put a cap on the stub. And that's it. $250 fee for that, plus the application fee. So the only time that this tearing everything out comes into effect is when you want to disconnect from the district altogether. And then you're punished by these thousands of dollars in fees to tear everything out. And then when somebody wants to build in the future, they're going to have this probably $7,000 to $15,000 fee for putting in the water and sewer laterals back in on top of their connection fees. These lots won't be built on, as the other board member mentioned. It's just a totally ridiculous situation. And like the previous lady was talking about, the policy of charging people $300 for an application fee, which is non-refundable, knowing full well that you're going to be charging them thousands of dollars to remove these laterals, and you don't mention that up front, and you don't give them their money back, is ridiculous. It does not help the PR for the water district. It's absolutely terrible. So anyway, I think that the board, and I've talked to most of the board members before on this, I think everybody's starting to see the light, that the existing way this is being implemented is absolutely ridiculous. That's why you've had 10 applications so far and nobody has done it. You've just taken their money and then basically told them to get lost because no one's ever going to pay those fees. Anyway, you guys all get the idea. So that's all I had to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments.
Unless you have any questions.
What are we going to do here? Are we going to table this, or are we going to refer it back to staff? And I'm certainly hearing the board agrees with these folks, and we want to come up with a better solution for everybody. So what's our course of action to the general manager? Do you want us to table it, or just refer it back, or what should we do?
This is the discussion item only at this point. I think staff has, I agree with the general, seems like the general consensus among the board. And so I think we have a good understanding of what the board's expectations are. We'll bring this item back with a policy recommendation as soon as we can.
Okay.
One more comment.
You take some more comments, Bertha?
We had another person to make a comment?
Yes, Bertha, if I can.
Certainly.
Yeah, this is Dale Pilgrim, and I'm representing the Pine Brook Homeowners Association. And we are involved in the middle of the process, and it was started by the fact that we have 4 meters feeding our services in our common area, of which 2 of them we don't use. But yet we pay the bi-monthly fees for I guess the connection fee. And we were interested in the process, obviously, to cut some costs by eliminating the monthly cost of those meters which aren't being used. Yes, and we, like everybody else, was surprised when I thought either they'd come out and leave the meter in and throw a padlock on, which is normal when they shut somebody off for non-payment of dues, or take the meter away and leave a padlock on or put a cap on. So I even though the cost wasn't defined at the time, we considered that it probably would be nominal. But to be $2,500 to $4,000 per connection for undoing it, we would probably at that point just say we can't afford that, and we'll let the future boards worry about how they're going to have the issue keep paying the water bills as time goes on, which is going to go up 3 to 5% a year for that service. There's no intent by obviously by the homeowner association to use those meters. There's not like a lot that where they might sell it someday to somebody who's going to develop it like some of the other people talked about. It's pretty straightforward. We wouldn't have any intent in the common areas of reusing these particular meter locations. So I just wanted to encourage the board to consider that, along with everything else they've heard, that I think you've lost a lot of the entire incentives and entire support for your customer base by doing a good thing by putting in the termination policy, but then coming along and making it maybe an unaffordable or unpractical policy to do it if you tune it up with these additional costs. So please give that some consideration.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dale. And so, Michael, you have your direction.
Bertha, can I say one more thing on the subject? This is Scott. Okay, I do agree with, I think all of the board has spoke now, and we have also heard from the public. I think all of us are on the same page. If we do go back, the 10 people that have already submitted their $300, there is a policy in force that we just came up with in August of 2019 that Director Thomas talked about signing, and would like to have it, like to have it being used and written. The way it's written right now is the $300 administrative fee and an operation fee. This is very varies by connection, but the operation fee is to have the water meter removed and/or the wastewater connection capped, period. Upon termination of service, the district will not refund any capacity fee. So that's all we're offering here. The word lateral isn't even in this policy. It does specifically say that the wastewater connection capped. And I would like to see that this termination of service policy that was created last year is written properly. And I think what we're talking about here today, and I think everyone that spoke from the public and everyone that spoke on the board agrees that to try and do it the least intrusive and most economic way makes sense for service as well as, the way it looks to the public.
Okay. Thank you, Scott. Okay. Do I have more?
Yes, you have.
Huh?
This is Russ. I want to make a comment to Jennifer and Arnold. If you were caught by surprise on this, I want to make it clear that I also was caught by surprise by this. It was never my intent or my desire to have such a financial burden put on the removal of these services. So we will fix it for you. Don't get mad at us and demand your $300 to be refunded. We hear you loud and clear. Just hang in there and we'll make it better. That's all I have for now.
Did you hear that? Did you get that comment?
We heard the comment and I appreciate it. Mike, we just want it done in a timely manner, please. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Any further comment? And I hope we can. Okay, we'll go on to 4B.
Cindy has something.
Bertha, can you or somebody make clear to me what the direction to staff is right now?
Michael.
Yeah. So I think we'll work up either a replacement policy or a revision to this policy based on the direction from the board, which I think is that we want to have a way to accommodate the temporary terminations of service that is more affordable, less of a burden on the property owner. So we will bring that back. We'll shoot for the next board meeting, and hopefully we can turn it around that quickly.
This is Cindy again. Based on what I heard everybody saying, even what Scott said, this policy looks good. To me, it sounds like we just have to determine what that rate is where it says the operation fee, and perhaps it could be something simple, like coming up with a flat rate, and we're done, and not putting such a burden on the customer for that. The district should absorb that cost, not do something based on what if.
Yeah, Michael will be looking at all aspects of it, and when it comes back, hopefully that'll be good. Okay. We're ready for 4B.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Joel. Thanks, Dana.
Discussion direction regarding the
Participant has left the meeting.
discussion direction regarding the fiscal year 2021 draft operating and CIP budgets. Rebecca?
Yeah, thank you. So I have the budget.
Gail Pilgrim.
Has left the meeting.
in your packet. I think what we're going to do is just probably discuss the technical makeup, similar to what I did with the Finance Committee in terms of how we put these schedules together, and then kind of talk holistically about what is included in here and some changes that have occurred since it was taken to the Finance Committee to where it's at today. So if you could go to the first page of the schedule. So if you think about the budget and how these schedules are set up, think of it as a pyramid, okay? So the first page is really that aggregate of everything that's happening behind it, all the pages that occur after it. So this is giving you a look of what our actuals were for 18-19, what the adopted budget was for 19-20, and by adopted budget, I'm talking about not the working budget that's subsequent to additional changes that the board made, all the way up till, whatever date. We're talking about the actual adopted budget that occurred last June of 2019. And then we've got the proposed budget for 2021 and the variance between the two budgets, the adopted version from 1920 and then the proposal, okay? Mm-hmm.
Just right off the bat, Rebecca, is there a reason that you use the budget that was created in June a year ago and then it's probably been revised several times during the year?
Yeah, and there's always
adjustments made, and so the actual year-end budget might be, I don't know how much different it's going to be. But
it's going to be different, and so there's just kind of some best practices that get put into place on which version you should really use. But so the kind of common best practice is to use that adopted version, the one that was from June, because sometimes what happens is like PSPS happens, or or an emergency breaks out. That is not, well, PSPS is a bad example because we're going to have more of that. But if you just have some like fire, right? If you have some like drought, if you have some sort of anomaly that happened in that fiscal year that forced budget adjustments to happen, that doesn't set a new trend. So you want to be careful of what you're kind of benchmarking against, which budget version you're benchmarking against, because it may not be your final budget, which is what we're working off of operationally, may not be what we're going to build off for the following year, because it's going to include these one-off things that happen just through the course of operations that may not be reoccurring. So that's why it's generally accepted and generally done to include that final budget, because it's a more holistic budget that's adopted in June, as opposed to, well, I need this increase or that decrease or whatever.
So when you do have those changes, and they're going to be continual, where in these pages would you note that you as Michael, as you're creating this budget, you're going to be looking at your numbers. So somewhere in here you will see and be able to explain what we added here.
It's going to be in the narrative. So when we're talking to you, so when we kind of go over some of the narrative, PSPS, we called that out. There's just things that we see as a recurring increase, and it wasn't just a one-time thing that happened in 1920. We're going to continue to see that, but we're still not entirely sure what the overall impacts of it are going to be.
One more question. I just noticed that between 1819, 19, and then 1920, that they were both that the total operating budget is $20 million in 1 year actual, and the adopted budget $20 million. It's going to hurt the proposed budget for this year jumps to 21.5 million. It's an extra little more than $1 million, which is a 3% or a 5.5% change, where the previous years it didn't change very much at all. Certainly not close to 5%, maybe 1%. I did the math there. But I just wanted to know at the end, the reason I started asking the question, at the end of the year, the adopted budget from June of 2019 was a long, long time ago, and all the changes that were made to it during the year, is that closer? I'm gonna guess it's gonna be much, much closer than the proposed
It's
20.
it is closer to the proposed.
And that's what I'd like to see, have a column in here to see what it is. What's the budget that we're working on in May and June?
Well, it's not even the adopted, it doesn't, a budget is a plan, right? And so what we really are talking about is what the projected dollar amounts are going to be for the rest of the year, actual. And so those are on subsequent schedules behind here, but we're just trying to give you an idea of, here is the finite year-end actuals for 18-19 because we're still in 19-20, right? So things can still change in the next 3 weeks. But based on those actuals, giving you a kind of an earmark of, kind of a benchmark of where we came from a budgetary perspective for 19-20, which is not exactly what the Indian working budget is going to be for 19-20, but it is what was adopted in your variances. And then splitting what that budget is for 2021 between water and sewer, so you can kind of see how, on total revenues, how that 18.3 million is going to split between water and sewer. It's a really high, bird's eye view of the budget overall. When you get into the subsequent schedules, we spend more time on the following schedules specific to revenue and then specific to expenditures. And that's when you're going to see, if you were to look at the revenue page, for instance, we had budgeted revenue, for instance, for 19-20 of 20.5 million, but we have projected year-end revenue of 21.3 million. That's where you start seeing where there's these unanticipated cash flows, these unanticipated, property tax came in higher, the rates came in higher than had been anticipated. We had OES grants and various grants that came in that we generally don't budget for because we're never sure if we're really going to get them. We know we're going to have the expenditure out, but sometimes it takes a really long time to get your claims out and back, so we don't want to count on that money. So when it comes in, it's more of an unanticipated cash flow. We had a lot of different things that happened throughout the course of the year that made that difference between what we had budgeted for revenue for 19-20 and where we project we're going to land for 19-20. And so what we base that 2021 on, obviously, is looking at that revenue picture first. Where do we think we're going to be in terms of revenue? Where do we think we're going to be in terms of projects, capital outlay and CIP projects that are going to cause transfers in to offset some of the staffing costs for engineering or staffing costs for operations. And so we take all of that into consideration, and then from there, we're able to build out our expenditures. We do look at, in all the expenditure information, starts on page 6. But the revenues, again, kind of looking at total revenues for the district and then breaking it up between water revenue and sewer revenue. But again, giving you that ability to look at, here was your actuals for 18-19, here's what we're projecting our actuals are going to be for 19-20, here was the budget for 19-20, here's what we're going to base the 2021 budget on based on those projected year-end totals. And we also go through an entire modeling that it's possible that the projected revenues for 19-20 also have things in it that are not going to recur. And this was where part of the change came from when we were projecting revenues in January based on the trends that we were seeing through mid-year, and then we had to revisit because January comes along and we knew investment revenues were going to go down. That was a big reason why we pushed to go with Chandler, so we could start looking at different ways that we can invest to kind of protect our investment returns and kind of build assets. But that was the one outlier. All the other revenues were coming in pretty strong. They were either projected to surpass budget or be at budget. And so those were all good indicators. We based the revenue originally for 2021 based on those trends that we were seeing happening in January and February, and then COVID hit. When COVID hit, and almost start over, because from there we had to determine, well, are our property taxes going to be impacted? Are the rates that we're paying going to be impacted? Is development going to be impacted? We do a lot of cost to serve. Are the cost to serve going to be impacted? Are the grants going to be, like, every aspect of revenue had to be looked at. Some are very fixed. We know the number of customers that we have. We know how many water connections we have. We know how many sewer connections we have. The sewer will stay pretty static. The only difference year over year is going to be if there was any planned rate increases. And so the sewer increases that you see between 1920 and the budget of 2021, that is purely because of the rate increase. Water is different. Water, we have base and we have consumption. And I think what we didn't fully grasp due to COVID, we make a lot of money on consumption. That's a big part of our revenue is on that consumption piece. Obviously, base rates are the bulk of it, but there is a pretty significant portion of consumption. And who is probably the biggest consumers out there would be businesses. When you have all the businesses shut down, your consumption basically disappears.
They're not at home using water?
Not as much as a business would. So there's no dishwashing, there's no laundry, there's no massive people coming in from out of the area, showering and washing their cars and all the stuff that you would see happening out there. Nobody was doing it. And anybody who was at home, if you were working from home, you may not have been showering as much as you would if you had to come to work every day. I'll admit that. So what we were seeing is consumptive drops. So that had to play into some of our revenue consideration as well. At the point that we put this together, there's still businesses that can't fully open. There's still going to be the strain, and we don't know to what aspect that's going to last, or if 2 weeks from now they say, okay, everybody open, everything's back to normal. We just don't know. So the revenue picture is fairly conservative. Even though, yes, it is projected to be higher to some degree than what we had budgeted for 1920, we still maintain some pretty conservative projections because of the unknown. So, yeah.
A quick question. I know you started to talk about page 6 going forward, but on pages 2, 3, 4, and 5, the title says through fiscal year 23-24. And is that accurate?
Oh, sorry, no. It is on one of my projection sheets, but not on yours. Okay. I can update that one. Thank you.
Okay.
I thought I got all those, but I did not. Okay, so does everybody understand kind of that revenue projection, what we had to do, and kind of some changes that had to be made between January and when we started realizing we might have a problem?
Consumption.
Yeah, consumption. Consumption and also revenue sources that we just don't control. And so, I talked to the assessor. She was concerned that we might see a reduction in property transfers. So her recommendation was keep your property taxes where they're at. Don't project any growth. But oddly enough, COVID has thus far, and we don't know if this is a knee-jerk, happening for a short period of time before we're going to see this trend continuing. If people were on the fence about retiring and moving up to the country, or they were just on the fence about just moving up to the country and commuting or whatever it was, we have heard and seen a lot of transfers. But again, is that a new trend where we're going to see that happening over and over and over again? Or are we going to see this spike happening right now, and then it's going to kind of level off, and then it's going to be back down to normal? But we are seeing an increase in restoration requests, restoration of service. We're seeing a lot of new connection requests, which was not anticipated. But again, is this going to happen for the next year, or was this something that happened just during this kind of critical period, and then it's going to kind of go back down to normal? So again, we have to take that in consideration and be fairly conservative with what those projections will be. Okay. So the expenditures, kind of a similar thing. So you're kind of moving your way down the pyramid, and so this is all of the expenditures, regardless of all the departments rolled up into the water fund, the sewer fund, and I say other, but what has historically happened, how our accounting has worked, and how we have kind of budgeted for things is we budgeted for things in the water fund and the sewer fund and what we call the general fund. The general fund basically ends up getting split between water and sewer. So it was causing confusion with our auditors. It caused like weird confusion in the budget. So as a 2021 cleanup, we are reporting other, which is the general fund, only for the purposes of the actuals for 18-19 and the year-to-date actuals and the projected year-end actuals for 19-20. You'll notice for the general fund for 2021, there is nothing budgeted in there because we are not going to be using that fund for any transacting. That way, we have a really good hold on cash flow between water and sewer. The auditor will be much happier with us because it's not creating this kind of undue burden for them to try to recalculate and shift everything out. So that's a pretty big change. So again, very similar setup to how revenue is. You've got your expenditures broken up between major classifications, salaries and benefits, services and supplies. So one major change that we made on these schedules, and you'll see it through all of the schedules, all the way down to the department, we segregated salaries and wages from director salaries and wages, because they are in fact reported separately for our financials, and they and we are accounting for it that way. So we wanted to make sure that how we are presenting this budget is exactly how we're going to end up transacting. What I don't want to have happen is, you know, when we're giving the budget status report to the finance committee and we're reporting out based on how we're transacting.
I've lost you, Rebecca.
So we're trying to make sure that those two jive and that they're where they need to be. So if the budget needs to be there, that's where we're transacting as well. So it's just more transparency and more clarity. We also have been historically giving you the benefits, which would include retirement expense and the CalPERS UAL. So retirement expense is CalPERS payments made for current employees. That is the normal cost, okay, the normal cost of their retirement. The CalPERS UAL is also a payment made to CalPERS, but it's specifically associated with the unfunded liability portion of the retirement. Okay? So historically, when we would give you the budget, we would just lump them all together into benefits, and you wouldn't know which portion is health, dental, vision, deferred comp, OPEB, whatever, and which portion was the retirement expense and which portion was the unfunded liability. However, we have to transact them all separately. So again, we wanted to make sure that those were in line with how we transact compared to how we budget. So that's also, if you were to look at, if you have a copy of the 1920 budget, it's going to look a little different than this, but this is really how we're transacting. So that was the other major change. So all of the other expenditures, again, all rolled up by department. And then as you continue going through, we have capital outlay as another, yep.
Looking on page 6, in the adopted budget, in the column called adopted budget fiscal year 1920.
Yep.
And looking at the very small numbers for retirement expenses in California, I think it's the first time we've seen it broken out that you were just mentioning. How come they're so small? $9,000, $9,900, and $4,700 compared to
that was in here. When the 1920 budget got put together, these costs here are specifically only to water resources. All the other retirement expense and CalPERS UAL for all of the other departments all got lumped into the benefit line item on the budget. This was the only that we.
Oh, wait, okay. Okay, you didn't go back and take them out. You're starting in 2021, you're doing them differently, but it's okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So if you added all those together for 1920 for the budget, they're going to be a little less than what they're going to be in 2021, but that difference specifically has to do with our health insurance is going up 10%. Half of it will be in the 2021, so we're only going to get hit with half of it because the other half will be 100% the following year. And then the CalPERS normal costs increased and the UAL increased. So between those benefits overall, if you added them all together for 1920 and then added all those lines up together for 2021, you would see it's still high, but they're within range of each other. Just because you're gonna probably look at it, telephone line item budgeted for almost 17,000, and then you see, we're gonna budget almost 90,000. If you recall, that was an error that was caught in the budget. It was a transposed number. So that is putting the budget in line with what the actual trends are. So there was some of that in here. Capital outlays, one other big change that is being made. So if you're comparing 1920 to 2021, things that got changed. The enterprise lease is a capital lease, and it is a capital event. How it was budgeted in 1920 was like vehicle and equipment, like service costs. It's really a capital outlay cost. The maintenance portion of that lease is a service line item. The bulk of the lease is actually a capital event. So that's the one other change that you're going to see, where we're putting that actually now in the capital outlay portion of the budget. And then in terms of debt service, we have you might recall the board approved a VACON purchase in 1920, but it took like a year to get it. I think we're supposed to get it here. Okay. So in the original discussions, that was going to be a 5-year debt service. We found much better terms, and so we're going to do a 4-year. So the debt service is reflective of that 4-year, but we end up saving pretty decent interest over the course of that 4 years.
So that company ready to do these lines?
kind of got changed around here. I think those were the major changes on debt service. Okay. And then we've got it just split between just water and sewer, leaving the general fund all the way out of it. And then again, split by water specifically, and then split by sewer specifically. So you just keep kind of going down that pyramid, and it gets more and more and more granular, okay? In terms of the capital outlay, there's a list here that talks about the different types of capital outlay.
What page are you on?
That is going to be on page 17. So the major additions are all listed here. The one, kind of big change, and we've talked about it at finance committees, and I think we've talked about it here at the board, is we do have to do something with our financial system and our utility billing customer service system. And so that's included in here as well. I also included a memo at the end of the budget packet of all the reasons and concerns and why we're advocating for that. We also had identified in conversations between engineering and operations and the general manager and myself that we've got projects that historically operations would just absorb the cost of them, but they didn't fall into the CIP schedule because they generally were projects that could be done in a year, but we're very expensive and really are capital projects that are actually doing R&R work that qualifies to use R&R funding, but they didn't fall on the CIP schedule, that 5-year schedule, because it's happening in a year, it's happening in a shorter period of time. So on page 18, that's where we tried to come up with a better title for these, but what we came up with was non-CIP capital water projects and non-CIP capital sewer projects. And part of this really was to alleviate operations from having to use water and wastewater funds, because it was getting to be pretty significant when there was the ability to potentially use R&R funding, because it tied well to these projects that were being done. So these were the projects that they had brought forward for that.
Excuse me, can we go back to page 17? You have a cost of Fin/UB replacement for the admin building, and what is that?
That is the finance and utility billing software.
Oh, okay. And that's at a cost of $97,000.
That is for the full, the full purchase and implementation, data conversion, the whole.
All your accounting needs, your GL, your billing, everything.
Project management, purchasing, document management, the whole kit and caboodle, yeah.
But as I read through your narrative, there's also a component in that 97,000 of continuing costs associated with Springbrook while you're making your transition.
Not in this cost. That cost is actually in the budget under service maintenance, I think is what it's under. And so we're going to have this kind of straddling period where we have to still continue to pay for Springbrook while we're moving forward with Tyler, because you can't just jump off one, flip the switch and jump onto the other one. So it's that kind of crossover period.
Better you than me. Wow.
Yeah. I'm excited about it because I think it's going to be pretty revolutionary. I think for the staff here, I think there's frustrations in general where they would just like to have better reporting and better workflow and just better abilities in the system, and we just are really lacking that.
Did you reach out to customers currently using Tyler?
Yeah. Yeah, so the most local one is CCWD. So they've implemented the Tyler system, and they are willing to help give us the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Did you ask them what the cons were?
It generally had to do with this is, hindsight is always 20/20. So when you implement, you always go, we should have done it a little different, or we should have taken a little more time to fix some of our processes or policies or procedures before we jumped into it. So those generally, that's a pretty common complaint.
Do you know what they are then?
Yeah. Yeah, and I've implemented systems before.
Was canceled.
It was canceled, so we were kind of waiting until everyone kind of started coming back, and then we're gonna start engaging on that as well. When we're allowed. Yes. And then we talk in here about the personnel allocation history, and Michael can go into more detail on that when we get to that point. And then for the rest of the document, we really have just broken it up by, by department, by, so you're going to see a schedule for each department, kind of a brief understanding of what each department does. We kind of kept that in line with what last year's budget included. And I think that is about it. And then the CIP cash flow is towards the very end, starting on page 48 and goes through page 50, and that's the water CIP and the sewer CIP. And my memo with regards to the finance system is right after those pages there. So if we want to go back to the overall narrative. On the staff report, I kind of discussed our budget scenery change. It came from January and February, and then we realized we're going to have to kind of go back to the drawing board. Some other just major changes, and this was given to the finance committee as well. So this isn't a change since the finance committee was, if you recall, Nicolay came here to discuss the OPEB and GASB statements with regards to the retiree health trust and how we fund it. And he recognized and had communicated with the board that we are in fact overfunding that OPEB trust, because the actuary will say, contribute 500,000 and, or it'll say contribute 800,000, but since we're already paying for the health insurance costs for the retirees, that is part of that contribution. Well, we've been kind of ignoring that, and we've also just been continuing to contribute that total. So in essence, we're over contributing above and beyond what the actuary says. We had to take that into consideration in this budget because we had a lot of critical needs, and given the fact that we kind of had to conservatively project our revenue, we made a decision to go forward with proposing bringing our OPEB contribution to the PARS Trust down to what that total is, taking into consideration the retiree health costs that we are in fact paying. So it comes out to about $300,000. So we left, but that's in line with what Gary from Nicolay had talked about with the board. And I would say definitely when we have resources where we can make very healthy contributions to pull that OPEB liability down, of course, that's a great strategy. When we have some volatility in our revenue picture, and we have some pretty significant needs and equipment that needs to be replaced and that aren't wants, that are in fact just critical needs. We kind of have to make some tough choices, and so that was one of the choices that we brought forward to the Finance Committee. And it'll be reviewed on a regular basis. The other thing that we have included, we changed our strategy in terms of how we're looking at OPEB. So we are actually going to be using some software to start modeling our OPEB liability. So we can start identifying based on the demographic changes, based on investment changes, based on any strategies that are coming down the pipeline, we'll be able to identify that change in liability overall, that unfunded liability and the actual asset value. So we're going to be using that modeling as a strategy to kind of make sure that we're in line regularly with where we want to be long term. And I think it'll be helpful in the discussion with the board going forward about what that exposure point is for that OPEB liability.
So we reduced the OPEB contribution by 300,000. What is the approximate total now, annual?
852,000, so it'll be 562-ish.
Okay. It was $1 million about 8 years ago. Okay.
So that was a big major change. And then in terms of how do you see what some of those kind of fundamental changes are that weren't taken into consideration necessarily in the 1920 budget when it was adopted in June, that's where we talk about it in this narrative. PSPS is an example of that. We have CARB compliance that we have to comply with. I wish the state had put that on hiatus, but they didn't. We've got vehicle maintenance that we need to address, and so we've kind of strategized how we're going to handle that. We talked about that financial utility billing software, and we're going to have a spike in the service maintenance costs for that 1 year because we have to straddle, but then it'll drop, down from there. And then, so we're going to have to pay for both systems for the 2021 year. And then we talk about all of the recent updates to the draft budget that happened after post-Finance Committee conversations. So Michael, do you want to go through those?
Yeah, thank you, Rebecca. I'm sure the board can see, Rebecca has put a tremendous amount of work in her short time here and getting a comprehensive understanding of our finances and our budget picture, making some proactive changes. And, I'm just really grateful for the work that she has done on this. A couple of points that I wanted to just address specifically. We have had a fair amount of turnover this past year. And succession planning is something that we've talked about, I'm sure going back way before my time at CCWD. We've known it's an issue that is going to be a challenge for us. And I think at this point, it's not something that's going to affect us in the future. It's something that is affecting us now. And so we are anticipating 10 or 11 retirements in the next 2 years, and several more every year after that for a while. It's possible that we have 40% of our staff turnover in the next 5-6 years, and that's a huge challenge that the management team is aware of, and we want to make sure we're proactively addressing that situation. And so that kind of brings me to the two of the changes that I wanted to point out since we presented this draft budget to the Finance Committee. We have, because of the vacancies that we've had over the past year, and in some cases some delay in filling those vacancies, whether candidates pulled out or COVID slowed things down, or for one reason or another. In some cases, there's been a significant delay in filling vacancies, which has been a challenge for staff in those departments. But because of those extended delays, we will have some carryover funds from this fiscal year that we want to be very, very careful about how we utilize that, because we acknowledge that it is a one-time source of funds. It's not something that we can use for ongoing expenditures. But we did want to make some proposals in this budget as to how we utilize those funds. And two of them are with, or what we're proposing is two new temporary positions, essentially. One is for our accountant 3, our senior accountant, it's primarily driven by the additional work effort that the finance department is going to have to undertake over the next year, both the finance software transition that Rebecca has talked about, and there's a detailed memo in the agenda packet about, and also some changes to how we do our accounting that are based on new audit requirements. That's going to be a significant amount of work for Rebecca over the next year. And the pending retirement also is a concern, one of our greatest concerns, because as far as succession planning goes, because there's only one person that does performs the function that person does, and it's obviously a critical position to make sure we have some overlap with. So the proposal is that we hire who we hope will be the replacement for our senior accountant early in the next fiscal year to help with those short-term additional work tasks in finance, and to have a lot of extended overlap between the existing accountant and the new hire. And the second proposed add is our treatment plant operators, who are already, even when things are going well, stretched pretty thin to cover all of the different facilities that we have spread throughout the county. But we've also had an operator on extended medical leave, and we don't know when to expect that person back. And so coverage of our plants right now is spread even thinner than it normally is. And so there's an immediate need to provide some assistance there. But we also have probably 2 retirements among the treatment plant operators in the next year or 2 that we're anticipating. So there's multiple benefits to hiring an additional treatment plant operator right now using these one-time funds, with the anticipation that there'll be a retirement before too long, and then we can reassess at that time the staffing need among the treatment plant operators.
Excuse me, Michael, what do you see as far as retirements in the field? Do you have a number of any kind, or?
I would say most of the retirements we're anticipating are in the operations department. I don't have the specific number. It is spread throughout. There's engineering, finance, but most of those are going to be in the operations department.
Okay.
Yeah.
And if, we're talking about, all of the institutional knowledge, and we're making a provision for the institutional knowledge as far as finance is concerned, but I really want to look at the institutional knowledge we're losing in the field. We need to get some backup to them. I know we're hiring one treatment plant operator, but that doesn't really give us the depth we need.
Yeah, I mean, if we could do more with what we have, I think that would be ideal. The way we're anticipating that we've had a lot of conversations about this in the management team. When we get, because one of the challenges is it's hard to, unless we give notice from an employee exactly when they're going to retire, it's hard to anticipate the timing. And so we always encourage staff to give us as much notice as possible, but that's going to be their decision. And when we have notice and when we know that a retirement is pending, we're going to take a very careful look in each of those instances as to, whether we can provide overlap with a new hire, whether refilling the position as it's currently, as it currently fits within the organizational structure is the best thing to do to begin with. And so we're always going to be looking at whether we can optimize the organizational structure and workflow. But even if it is, in a lot of cases, it's going to be backfilling the same position, and we'll look at providing as much overlap as we can. And we think that we will be able to do that because we know in most cases, the new hire will typically come in at a lower level than the retiring employee. And so there'll be some increased cost in providing that overlap where we can, but there'll be some cost savings down the road. And so we think that with the way that we have the budget right now, we will have some flexibility to provide some overlap where we can. It's not going to be as much as we would like in every case, but we will make sure that everything is covered and we'll provide as much overlap as we can.
Okay, and so you say the trigger is when you get word of an upcoming retirement, right?
When we get specific notice, because we have a lot of, and I'm sure the board's heard about them too, we have a lot of retirees that are going to retire or potential retirees that are going to retire sometime in the next, 1, 2, 3, 5 years. And obviously we've also had past experience of that kind of conversation followed by another, 3 years later, we're still having that conversation with the same person. So it's hard, we can't really put give numbers as to who we're going to hire and when until we have those specific dates. But we do have we're having the dialogue now as to how we are going to try to provide as much overlap in each of those cases as we can. So with the accountant and the treatment plant operator, we feel like those will go a long ways in those departments to do some knowledge transfer. And also, I think the primary driver in both of those cases is the immediate need. But it also provides us with the advantage of having some opportunity to have some extended overlap with some anticipated retirees.
Okay, well, you're focusing on that, or you're keep being very well aware of what's happening, and so let's just continue to do so. That's all I can say. Okay.
For you, Rebecca, I kind of would like you can explain to me, like in layman terms, when we have a $450,000 surplus, it's like how did that happen? So we budgeted for something, it didn't get spent, just a little bit. And so when I look at the adopted budget, is that $450,000? Did that come off of operating revenues? Like water sales? Okay, so it's not anything we pulled out of the fund.
No, and just, so I'm kind of really effective over transfers.
Right.
I have seen it in my history where the transfer would happen first, and then maybe the expense would happen on the other side. So, that's a big no-no. So I look at transfers like a grant reimbursement. So I want to see the expense happen first, and then I'll give you your money. So I'm really diligent on that because that can get you in trouble. But no, this was basically unanticipated revenue coupled with, like what Michael said, just we just had salary savings, benefit savings because of turnover, and then we, couldn't, just couldn't get the hiring done, and then COVID happened, and then you further can't get the hiring done, and then we start hearing about retirements, and then we kind of stand back and realize, this is an opportunity for us to kind of take a time out and evaluate kind of a longer term plan of what's going to work best.
So I have another question, it might be silly, sorry. So, it's a good year. We have operating revenues, and we have a surplus, we spend it. What's the policy? Where does that extra money go?
It stays in those respective funds. So we will
Operating funds.
in water or in sewer. Those kind of are the two camps, right? So any revenues that are generated off of water have to stay with water, same thing with sewer. And so those funds all remain in there. So if you were to have a surplus at the end of the year, then that can then be brought forward to the board to say, like in this case, we're projecting a surplus, and this is what we would like to do with it. You just want to be really diligent that you only spend it on one-time costs or things that are only going to happen in that respective fiscal year.
So putting it in a separate line item is better transparency, better tracking, instead of saying, okay, now our fund grew 450,000 for the water, let's say, and let's say this admin is, where we want to spend it. So we could have, in theory, in the fund, but we're pulling it out and calling it this surplus, just for better tracking it.
It's still staying in the fund. So if you look at page 1 of your budget packet, you're going to see this line item and it says surplus fund balance.
Yeah.
And so the 450, 218 is associated with the water, 232 is associated with the sewer. And so that money is still sitting in those funds. So if something happens for 2021 and we ran into the same issue, those funds are still in there. They don't get swept anywhere else.
Instead of just putting it up there and then adding a new account entry or operator or whatever, we did it this way, just so we could better show what we're doing.
Right, because if we didn't show, what would happen is you would just see, what you would see is you would just have a negative shortfall. You would just see a shortfall. And then I'd have to explain, well, it's not really a shortfall.
Right.
It's because we have some carryover funds that are already there. And so we're going to leverage off those carryover, that fund equity that's going to happen, that we're projecting to happen, that's going to offset the fact that we've got a gap between the projected revenues for the budget and the projected expenditures.
Okay.
So far,
Further questions?
yes, Bertha.
Uh-huh.
You have mentioned the tremendous contribution that this board has reduced our.
You have reduced, I'll tell you,
Fantastic.
there is a certain percentage of that number that's directly from you.
We're at any conferences, Scott has a billing for any
Mileage?
I've saved the 7 miles of travel.
Yeah.
For about 2 or 3 months. That's round trip, it was the first person down Tuesday.
So, anyway, I just want to tell you how comforting it is to me to look over these numbers. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
A lot of hard work this way, tons of numbers.
There are a couple other highlights I just wanted to point out, if that's all right.
Go ahead.
Because the other needs that we identified as the most critical right now that when we had the flexibility of some additional one-time funding, one of the big concerns was as we were going back through with our reduced revenue projections and going back through and cutting from the budget, we eliminated any expenditure on new generators or replacement generators, which Damon and I were both very nervous about, probably not as nervous as our mechanics and electricians, but we're all very nervous about that. And the hope and the hope is that PG&E has made some improvements to the grid, and the PSPS events will be shorter and less frequent, but that remains to be seen. We'll see. I'll just leave it at that. So what we added back in was a replacement generator. I think we ended up at 180,000 for replacement or new generator. And I think what we're working on right now is probably a replacement of the standby generator at the Hunter's Water Treatment Plant. We think that is probably the most critical need. But the mechanics and electricians and Damon are working with the vendors to find out what our most, both what our most critical needs is and matching that up with what's available. And so that work's going on right now. So that was one of the other items. And then lastly, Rebecca Cowan mentioned earlier, our ongoing CARB compliance issue. We had a replacement dump truck in the budget, but we added, there's other equipment that we have
left the meeting.
Off-road equipment that is not in compliance, that we need to replace before it gets shut down. So we added, I think, another 80 or 100,000 to that. I think it was 80,000 to that line item to help us replace some other equipment. So we felt like those two temporary increases in staffing and the critical equipment replacement that we need were a good use of one-time carryover funds. And so I just wanted to highlight those things because that was a new development after the Finance Committee, and also hopefully reassuring the board to the extent that we are continuing to do additional maintenance on generators and replace generators as we have the resources for. So we're hoping that the PSPS events go smoothly this year, but we're also aware of the fact that our generator fleet is aging, and over time we will need to continue replacing those generators. We've also applied for, Damon's put a lot of work into a grant application that would FEMA pre-disaster mitigation funding, and we're hoping that comes through. We can't count on it for this coming fiscal year, but that would provide significant funding for generator replacement as well. So we're looking for grant funding where we can find it, and any other source of funds. So far, nothing else has been made available to address PSPS costs, but we'll keep tracking that, and anywhere else we can find funding, we will. We'll pursue it.
Okay. Then we will bring the budget back to the board on June the 24th, correct?
Yeah, and just one last item. I just did want to mention, we don't need to get into it in significant detail here, but we are also, as a part of this budget process, because we had some vacancies, and we've been working on some organizational changes as well, and repurposing vacancies in some cases, and doing, making some changes to the organization that we feel like will really position us to adapt and handle our succession planning and our the significant turnover that we're going to experience. But also some of the positions are being retooled to make sure that we have better coordination between the departments within the district, with the goal of providing better customer service, more responsive, so that each of the departments is more responsive to customer requests and customer complaints, and that we're turning things around as fast as we can, and that we make sure that we have a focus on that in each of the departments in the district. That's sort of embedded in all of the changes that we're making, as that increased focus on customer service and responsiveness. So we mentioned some of the highlights on those changes. But I just wanted to let the board know that we've put a lot of work into that. We're having that conversation with the union, and we hope to implement those changes in the coming fiscal year.
Okay. I thank you. And I'd just like to emphasize what Russ gave his thanks to Rebecca, and I want to extend my thanks to Rebecca and to your department heads, Michael. They're very important when I go through and I see all the slashes that they've had to make at our request in order to make a legitimate budget, and that's hard work for them also to do the various cuts that they must. So anyway, my thanks.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that. It has been a tremendous amount of work, especially having to go back to the drawing board in some cases a couple of times. And Rebecca's done a fantastic job of managing that process. But you're right, all of the whole management team has really, it's been a team effort. And I think as Rebecca mentioned, she described a budget as a plan, but it's a plan that reflects the priorities of the organization. And I feel really good about this budget and that it does reflect the priorities that the board has given us. And yeah, I completely agree though. The management team's put a lot of work into this, and I think setting us up for success.
Right. Okay, then we'll go on. Come back to the board on June 24th, and if we can go on to item 4C.
Dave, just real quickly, is that going to be a public meeting?
The adoption of the budget?
Yeah, not what we're doing right now.
Not right now. It'll be at the next regular meeting.
That will
make sure the board
will be present at.
Sorry, what's that?
We will be present at.
Instead of a teleconference, Michael.
I think it would still be probably run the same way as this one is. I don't know if we would anticipate changes between now and the next board meeting, but the board members would have the option to be present in person. And I will be back in state to be there in person as well. But I don't know. I'll work with Matt and we can and Rebecca and see if we can open it up to the public at that point. But we're still restricted as to what we can do on that. But it will be a regular board meeting that the budget will be that we anticipate the adoption at. We wanted to give the board another a chance to take enough time to take a closer look at it or raise any other questions or issues. So we wanted to have the discussion item first and then bring it back for adoption.
Okay, because I think Jeff is alluding to how the county is looking at COVID right now.
I don't care how the county's looking at it, to be honest with you. I couldn't care less what they think.
No, as far as the restrictions or, the guidance they're giving us.
Well, I mean, they're opening bars and restaurants up this weekend and gyms. I don't know why we can't be operational. I mean, we're lucky to get 4 people that show up to a budget meeting, and usually it's because they run out of gas or something, and they just shoot the phone.
Matt, do you want to chime in on that? Because we've had that conversation about whether or not and when the right time to open it up again to public is.
Right. So it's not necessarily on the agenda. So no. But I guess my only comment was we can't have the board in there, and things are changing every day with respect to what the governor has implemented in the state. And so we'll look at all those and see if it's something we feel we can do within the parameters that we've been given. And as long as we can do it safely, we'll look at that, and I'll have an answer before the next meeting, because it's changing daily, different ways. So.
Okay. Well, I will come down off the mountain if that's what the rest of the board is doing. That's fine with me.
We'll cross that bridge when we get to it, but it's my preference.
Okay.
And there will still be the option to dial in if there's health concerns or yeah,
Yeah.
we'll still have that option.
Okay, all right. Okay, item 4C.
Could I request a 5-minute recess here for a moment?
Okay, all right. Let's take 5. We'll take 5. I'm back.
Sir, I don't think our meeting is open to the public.
Oh, well, I'm part of CCWD and I was on my laptop. I couldn't quite get through. I hate these computer things. So we have questions that the membership asked me to come in to represent them and ask you comments on the budget. I have to say a few things.
We're in recess, right?
Well, yeah, that's what I thought. You got recess. I just jammed over here. I figured I'm just down the street.
But I think our attorney has advised us that because of the COVID-19 thing, that we cannot open the doors or allow anyone from the public to come into the meeting. We discussed in it, we went into, and so they're gonna look into it for the next meeting on the 24th. It might be open to the public, but those.
Okay, well then I'll just be right outside my laptop.
Okay. And then
What do you want us to ask Matt right now? If he can stay and ask him?
Yeah, Matt, I think we should check with Matt, but that's a CCWD employee. Is that Mike?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we don't have to open it up to the public.
Oh, yeah, yes, you guys. I'm sorry. You work here? I don't think I think you're arrested in the building then. All right.
He's gonna be running against you.
Okay, sorry about that. Oh, it's okay. I mean, get your, I wish I had a shirt.
This could easily be kind of.
I suppose it depends on what his comments are going to be. We should clarify that before we let him speak.
Not good. Not good.
Who are you kidding out there?
Mike,
I
always appreciate hearing from Mike, so I welcome that.
Okay.
We should get this meeting back in session.
Okay, I'm back. Is everybody back?
Yes.
Yeah, but on the technical aspect.
Yes.
Okay, everybody. All right, item 4C, discussion action amending the fiscal year 2019-20 personnel allocation. Rebecca.
President Underhill, I think we have a member of CCWD staff that wanted to make a comment on the agenda item, the budget agenda item before we move on to the next item.
Okay.
Good. All right, do I talk to Mike or talk right here, or is it good?
Go to Mike.
Mike is better? Okay.
Mike for Mike. That is Mike.
Hello, do I get push the button?
Get on.
How about now, can you hear me?
There you go.
Okay, yes, my name is Mike Zambrano. I work for CCWD. I'm representing the SEIU union. I'm the VP, so I'm staying in for the president. Couldn't make it time, so we've had a lot of employees come out and concerned over, some of the budget items. Actually, just one at the moment, so I just rip the Band-Aid and go from there, right? The one that we got those feedback from was the what's it called? Financial utility billing software. Okay, so currently employees in your office are using Springbrook, from what I'm understanding, and I've been using it for 20 plus years and it's been working fine. So the suggestion of going to a new program with Tyler, has incurred some costs. So we're talking about the implementation. You guys probably had this packet too. You probably read it over. $97,800 just to apply it for implementation, plus the licensing costs and stuff. We're looking at $60,000, so it's roughly $160,000 to get this off the ground, implementation and the software. Then on addition to that, in additional, with some of the savings you guys will incur with the other costs and recovery services and bonds, you guys will still be paying another $6,500 annual cost on top of what you already spent. So if we stayed for what we had, it would only be $49,391, and that would be with the, I'm assuming, the hosted version. I don't think we have the hosted version now. Is that right, Rebecca? So yeah, it's a little more, $49,000, but we'd be saving the $98,000 extra that we put into it. A lot of employees are really just concerned because we were told during negotiations that we're tight on the budget. So it's something that's not really that necessary. Maybe the money can go someplace else, like in the field and repairing costs and the pumps, motors,
and other infrastructure that we definitely do need. Or if you guys feel generous, wages, 1% is not bad. Just you guys' thoughts. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Mike.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And that's been noted, right? Okay.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate that. I don't know if Rebecca is still there, but I'll just say briefly that there's a detailed discussion in the in the budget packet about the rationale for that transition, and there is we acknowledge an upfront cost, especially this coming year, and there would be an increase in the licensing fees going forward if we use Springbrook as we currently use it, which we would have to make some upgrades to that anyways. So that is something that we have wrestled with, and I know Rebecca's done a lot of research into what the best solution there is, and we ended up at the conclusion of we need to make a change. It's a surprise to me to hear anybody's happy with Springbrook, because all I've ever heard about Springbrook since I started at CCWD was complaints. So that's the only surprising part of that. But other than that, I think we are aware of the cost issue, and even in the tight budget situation that we have this year, we felt like it was a long-term, a good investment for the district.
Yeah, and I'm also surprised by the comment, because every person from finance to customer service has had a complaint against Springbrook. It does this, but it doesn't do that. Our outside auditors are complaining about the information that comes out of it. It's really not a good financial system.
But also, you want to do a report, Springbrook has to build it for you.
They have to pay for it.
Well, there mentioned, because most of the office staff brought it to my attention. It's not, I don't even work with Springbrook, so this is not my forte. But it was their concern to bring it to the union, to bring it to you guys. So, but they said that we are not on the current version, so we are probably 3 versions back. So even if we went with the newest version, it would be able to get by what we can do for maybe another year, or maybe kick this can down the road till, because we are tight. We're trying to do our best, and we're sacrificing on the field. So I mean, we should do all our part. If we're going to give up what we're going to give up, maybe we should all look at things a little tighter,
So the server that we're on is end of life, so we have to make a change no matter what. And so that was the first thing that we had to look at. I have included all of the office staff, all finance, all customer service, all operational staff that are currently using Springbrook or would be using Springbrook. I've included HR. I've included, everybody I possibly could in terms of staff that are currently using Springbrook or could benefit from things that Springbrook might offer that we're not currently using, or if we were to go to a Tyler. We had demos done by Springbrook, and we looked at a couple of things. We looked at what Springbrook currently, based on the version that we're on, offers that we're not using. We looked at a demo for if we were to upgrade to Springbrook, what that would offer, and we also looked at demos for Tyler, and if we were to go with a company like Tyler, what Tyler would offer compared to what we currently have. And we identified, there's pros and cons to both, but Tyler, in terms of looking at it from a holistic standpoint, because right now we're using multiple different kinds of software all over the place, and we still have voids in what we can accommodate. We have issues with document management. We have issues with workflow. The purchasing is still manual if you're going to do a purchase order. And those were all things that we generally are struggling with on a day-to-day basis. So we had to take all of that into consideration. All comments were taken into consideration by staff. No one communicated to me that Springbrook works great and they're happy with it.
And it's odd, because I got the exact opposite.
Maybe we should bring it in and take her comment.
And that was all, kind of, emails to me and correspondence that we've had in meetings that David has been present with. There's been a kind of a general.
Maybe, I would suggest maybe having a office staff meeting and discussing it, because it is to bring me out of what I'm doing to come down here to bring this up. It must be of some importance to them. I'm only just a union rep for our side of the union, so if it really bothers them, they feel there's a need. I think it wouldn't hurt to have a meeting and hash this out,
Mike, I think that's a great suggestion, and I really appreciate you bringing that up and the way you presented this, consistent with your professionalism as always. So I appreciate that, and I think we should have that discussion again. But the other thing I would just point out is this is a conversation that Jeff Meyer and I had before he left. And I think he commented to me several times that his frustrations with Springbrook, and that at some point we need to make a change. The look of exhaustion that came over his face every time we talked about making that transition was actually visually apparent. So I think Jeff made it work as long as we could make it work. But something needs to change at this point. It's either upgrades to Springbrook or a transition to a new program. And I think Rebecca has done her due diligence on that front. So I support her recommendation.
All right. Okay, I thank you very much. And we'll now proceed to item 4C. Discussion action amending the fiscal year 2019-20 personnel allocation. Rebecca?
So this is, it was discussed in the budget for 2021, but we wanted to make sure that the board really understood kind of what our intention was for 2021. But in order to get this hired as quickly as we possibly can, that's what this item is. And this is for the treatment plant operator 2. So what we're asking,
Sorry, go ahead, Rebecca.
So what we're asking for is to amend the personnel allocation list for 1920. There's no budget change because there's savings within the resources as it is, and chances are we probably are not hiring someone between now and the end of the month, but at least we could start recruiting and start moving that direction. Okay.
I'll move for acceptance.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Public comment?
Rebecca?
Public comment, Bertha?
Public comment.
Public comment. Hearing none.
Okay.
Call the roll, please.
Director Cicada?
Yes.
Director Thomas?
Yes.
Director Davidson?
Yes.
President Underhill?
Yes. Okay, we're on to item number 4, a public hearing. And these are the annual standby assessment fees. And I've been advised that we can go ahead and group these all and make them under one resolution.
One unified motion. Individual resolutions under one unified motion.
Oh, okay. All right. I was saying Cindy. I said not Rebecca. Okay. Annual standby assessment fee for Indian Rock. Vineyards, West Point improvement, Ebbets Pass improvement, Jenny Lind improvement, Saddle Creek subdivision, and Copper Cove.
Copper Cove Lock Antenna.
Copper Cove Lock Antenna, excuse me. Yes, we can't forget.
I'll move for acceptance.
We have to, sorry, this is Matt. You have to open the public hearing, allow public to comment, close the public hearing and then move for acceptance.
All right. Sorry. Okay, I will open the public hearing for the annual standby assessment fees. Then I take a vote.
Then you'd ask for any public to comment.
Okay. Any public comment? Hearing none? Or do I hear something? Do I hear something? Okay.
Close the public hearing.
Okay, close the public hearing. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
I'll second.
Okay. Call the roll.
Okay, Director Ratterman?
Yes.
Director Takeda? Yes. Director Thomas?
Yes.
Director Davidson?
Yes.
President Underhill?
Yes. Oh. Okay, item 6, reports. Report on the May 2020 Operations Department. Mr. Damon.
Good afternoon, President Underhill. Respecting everybody's time, I'm happy to take any questions via exception. In a nutshell, it was a quiet operations report. There were a few service lateral repairs of note, some fire hydrant replacements, but knock on wood, all in all, as we move forward, we continue with positive work efforts and no surprises.
Well, I do want to commend you on your report and the detail it goes into.
Appreciate it.
Very good job.
Thank you.
But I'm saddened to see we have no videos.
Right. I'm happy to resume the presentations, but I appreciate everyone's time also.
While you're there, I just have a couple questions regarding generators and the California Air Resources Board. Although we do have generators that have been in service for maybe decades, diesel generators, they haven't run very often. So are we facing the need or the requirement to replace those, even though they have relatively low hours, just because of CARB requirements?
No. So we have to be sensitive to CARB when we purchase a trailer mounted generator. So we have to have Tier 4 compliant engines with new purchases for trailer mounted, or we can be cited if we are using a Tier 2 or below, or Tier 3 or below as a trailer mounted generator.
Can I ask one question on that real quick? Generator, is it still working?
But to follow up on the stationary generators, we do have those inspected annually by the local Air Resources Board, and we have, as you pointed out, some generators of vintage that continue to operate fine, and they, as they are inspected, any notes or issues associated with emissions come up at that point in time, and we haven't experienced any thus far.
Well, I recall that during the first or second PSP event, that we were admonished that we were running the generators too much by Air Resources Board. Is my recollection about that wrong?
I believe, so I didn't experience that directly, but I definitely saw that was a topic of conversation amongst water and wastewater utilities statewide. But I didn't speak to anyone locally and directly about the amount of hours we were running. It's kind of interesting because generally as you report your hours, it's usually, 1 hour a month because it exercised 4 times in a month. And so I could see how in certain counties with extensive generator usage, how the local air resources districts could get a little disconcerted about the amount of operation that was going on. But I didn't experience anything directly.
Okay. And you had a question?
For the CARB compliance, is it only for the trailer mounted generators? If you have a stationary one, you don't have to follow that, or?
So they are permitted differently. So there are, yes, there are, I wouldn't say there are certainly, there's not as much of a compulsion to replace them if they are stationary. So it's basically as they fail, when we replace, obviously we're going to replace with a Tier 4 or Tier 4 interim engine. But when it comes to the trailer mounted, there is absolutely some taking the older one out of the fleet. And they also tie, as another component Michael brought up earlier, one of the off-highway emissions program, the DOORS program, is also something that the district needs to be sensitive about in terms of motors over 50 horsepower that are non-CARB compliant being operated out in the field, but not on a roadway. And so that program is something that we really, frankly, need to better understand how the impacts of the district are going to look long-term. But we do understand that currently we do have some pieces of equipment, namely backhoes, that are not going to be compliant after this year. So we need to start, but it's kind of an averaging, so you can have a couple of non-compliant pieces of equipment. You can incorporate it in the broader size of the fleet and still be in compliance. You can have low run hours. If you stay under 100 annual hours, you can still continue to operate the piece of equipment. So there are a lot of provisions that will allow us to continue to keep equipment, but we also need to start to kind of move forward on replacing some of the older stuff.
So far, the air resources board hasn't come down on gasoline engines. So does it make any sense to consider buying trailer mounted generators that are gasoline rather than diesel?
Frankly, I haven't thought about it, but it's definitely something that I will, and I'll bring folks like Mike and Bob and our mechanical crew into the loop to think about. One question that I would just have at the outset is, what is the runtime associated with the refill? And so, definitely something worth looking at.
Well, and we've become accustomed to think in terms of the economy of running a diesel engine rather than a gasoline engine. That doesn't really, it isn't valid anymore. They may continue to get rid of it.
Right. Yeah, you make a great point. We do propane, and we do have some propane, and one of the benefits to propane, as you know, is that we can fill the receiver in November or October in anticipation of the snow and whatnot, or inclement weather, and we don't have to fill it again until May or June. However, in wildfire season, there are issues associated with having a propane generator in the forest. So it's a give and take. But gasoline, I have not yet, but I will.
Can you report? We still have another hour.
Yeah, right. I can do some quick research.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Just add in response to Director Thomas's first question, there are other districts that have faced, I don't think anybody actually got hit with fines, but there were stern warnings, I'll put it that way, from other air districts, mostly in more urban areas that are much more restrictive and have a lot more enforcement of those permit requirements. And so there was a legislative effort this year, both Aqua sponsored a bill and CMUA sponsored a bill. The Aqua bill is now dead. The CMUA bill is one of the few pieces of legislation that isn't COVID or budget related that's still moving forward this year. And there's been a lot of discussion about that, and I've looped Damon and Charles into that discussion to make sure we're on the advocating for the right side of it. But there is still some legislative potential, some legislative action that would make sure that water districts are not being penalized for running generators during power outages. But obviously, it's a tortured process getting through the legislature, and the air boards have their own opinion about it. So that's the negotiation that's going on right now.
Okay. Any other questions for Damon? Okay, well, thank you. General Manager's report.
Yeah, I'll just, it struck me that Damon said it's been a quiet month in operations because those guys are busy and they do a phenomenal job. And Damon does a phenomenal job of leading those crews. There's been a tremendous amount of work underway, and I should have called it out while he was still in the room. But Mike Sombrano is one of those guys that is so dependable and so dedicated. You know, he's out there in the middle of the night if we need him to be. And I think he's an example of just the really, we're really lucky to have the staff that we have at CCWD. So I just wanted to give that update on the heels of Damon's very modest operations report that things have been quiet. And there are there's a lot of construction going on in addition to all the work that operations is doing. The Reach One project is progressing. So there's traffic controls on Highway 4 going up the pass. The Techite project has started, which I know President Underhill is very excited about, and I've informed her that she's not allowed to complain about the traffic controls, considering how high of a priority that project has been for her. So but we are all very excited to see that project underway because it's been a problem for the district for a long time. The Jenny Lind service line replacement project's also moving forward, and there were initially some minor miscommunications with the contractor, but I think it's been ironed out, and Charles and Damon are on top of it, and that project's moving forward. So a lot of construction going on, and a lot of smaller projects that operations is carrying out on their own. As far as the COVID response status, Director Davidson brought this up briefly, but we have essentially returned to full staffing levels. We're still allowing people, and we still want to accommodate, especially if folks are how do we put it, if they have a lot of life experience, or if they have any medical issues that create additional risk, then we want to accommodate. We want to make sure they have the ability to work from home, and the district is going to accommodate that. But everybody is allowed to be in the office, and I would say on most days, at this point in the office, most of the staff is back. With some, a few exceptions that are working remotely. And operations has largely, I think, returned to normal. I mean, with the caveat to all of that is we're still recommending social distance to the extent possible. We're still, we have the signs up, I'm sure you guys have seen in the office. The hand washing notices and the hand sanitizer everywhere. So we're still trying to take precautions to keep everyone safe and accommodate remote work where we can. But for the most part, we're trending back to normal, which I think everybody's relieved by. And lastly, I think my update's going to be pretty short today, but I'm very excited that our new manager of water resources, and I hate to jinx this because of what happened with the last candidate that we hired, but he's supposed to be starting Monday, June 15th. And I can now tell you his name is Brad Arnold, fitting for Calaveras County. He is currently a senior engineer, senior water resources engineer at Santa Clara Valley Water District, and he's an engineer. He has a mechanical engineering degree, a master's in agricultural engineering, and a master's in water resources engineering. He's got a lot of experience that is directly related to the areas of work that we need our manager of water resources to be involved in. So I'm excited to get him. I think hopefully he's prepared for the long list of things we are going to hit him with on his first day, because that position's been vacant for too long, and we need to start making some progress in some areas pretty quickly. But I'm confident with him, he'll be able to hit the ground running. So with that, unless there's questions for me, I think that's it.
Okay, great. Well, welcome to Brad Arnold. Item 7, board reports. Let's start with Cindy.
I'll let Russ make a comment first. Go ahead.
Michael, I just wanted to ask you, if you're going to hit them on his first day with all that stuff, is he gonna show up again on the second day?
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. But if he does, then we know we got a good one.
Okay. Cindy, did you say anything? Have any comments?
Yes, I have a IRWM meeting next week, and Michael would need the water resources person to be the LAC representative. We know that Carolyn's IRWM is kind of after you and I get that going, so that's good that he's starting. So next week I have IRWM, and that's all I will not be here for the July 8th meeting. I'll try to, but why not if they show up, then good. That's it.
Okay. All right. Jeff?
Nothing to report.
Then we go to Russ.
Okay, the only thing that I have to report is that I've been going back and forth with the potential for attending a virtual aqua conference. And I think that I have decided that I will be attending the conference telepathically or whatever they call it.
Good luck with that.
Yeah.
I think Dave Egerton would want me to speak up right now and encourage everybody to continue. Because they do have a lot of high-profile speakers lined up that are confirmed. And so hopefully the events are still educational. It certainly won't be anything like what a normal aqua conference is, but they put a lot of work into lining up some good panels and some good speakers. So hopefully there'll still be value there.
Okay. Looking forward to that. Let's see, Scott?
Are you done, Russ?
I was just asking if there's going to be a hospitality house.
At the conference?
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I bailed.
You did?
I bailed.
After you talked me into doing it? You're always doing that.
Did not. Yes, Bertha, thank you. Tomorrow, I have my first Aqua JPIA Property Committee meeting. It's a virtual meeting at 10 a.m. And then on Friday, Mountain County says we have our regular scheduled Mountain County meeting. Also, will be a virtual meeting. And then next week, we finally got on a committee here at CCWD, the Legal Affairs Committee, after not being on the whole last year. But we finally have our legal affairs meeting next Wednesday at 2 p.m. here in this room. That's all I have.
Wonderful. Okay, well, I'm just going to tell you that I'll just repeat what Michael said. We started up on Miko, and Emerson, KW Emerson is there with all of his tools or big machines or whatever. So I'm thrilled with that. Absolutely thrilled. It's overcast up here, and we weren't supposed to get rain until Friday, so I don't know how it is down there, but looks like it's going to rain. Information or future agenda items? Anything? Future?
Yeah, I would like to ask Michael if he can report at the next meeting on any progress, if at all, with the county on the groundwater monitoring problem or the SIGMA compliance. I just am fearful that the county is going to continue to drag their feet on that. I'd like to know what's going on.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Okay. Next board meeting, June the 24th, 1 o'clock, and then the one after would be July 8th at 1 o'clock. All right, going into closed session. Government Code 54957.6 agency negotiators, and we'll have Michael and Stacy. And And then 9B, conference with legal counsel existing litigation. And we'll meet with Matt. Okay, so
Thank you. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, Rebecca.
okay, so we now call.
Yes, I sent out the call-in information earlier today.
Okay. So
has left the meeting. has joined the meeting.
Hello?
I'm here.
Okay.
I can hear you.
We have no reportable action from the closed session. Meeting is adjourned. What? Uh-huh.
Hey,
Yes.
did you email me during the meeting?
No.
Okay, well.
I got one of those too, Jeff. Don't open it up or don't respond.
Yeah, no, I know. I just wanted to let her know.
Uh-oh. All right, thanks.
Good.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Well, yeah, it's not you or me, it's somebody.
Has left the meeting.
Okay, gang. Thank you very much.